In the present video, I will summarize our paper Supervising Multiple Operating Rooms Using a Head-1 Display, a longitudinal evaluation of the experience of supervising anesthesiologists and their co-workers. During an operation, there's always one qualified person next to the patient, such as a junior anesthesiologist. In the hospital under study, in addition to the junior anesthesiologists, there were two supervising senior anesthesiologists. They will provide relief for staff during breaks, assist in specific procedures, provide advice, and also help in case of emergencies. However, the supervisors can only be in one room at the time. So if there is a problem in another room or a deteriorating patient, they rely on a phone call from the junior anesthesiologist at the bedside. In the present study, we introduced a Head-1 display showing the vital signs of all 6 operating rooms that the supervisors has to supervise. So each row represents an operating room, and we provided heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. The information was updated every second, and in case of an alarm, there was an audio signal flash, and also an indication which of the vital signs crossed a border. In addition, participants could zoom into one of the operating rooms and could get further information on the vital signs. The related work on smart glasses and AR studies on hospital vital sign monitoring showed that there's a general lack of longitudinal studies for AR and smart glasses. Most of the studies only lasted for minutes. The effect of single-user Head-1 display on team processes and collaboration are underexplored. So in this case, only one participant wore the Head-1 display and had to work with co-workers who did not wear a Head-1 display. Finally, medical AR and smart glasses studies have not addressed the experience of the users, but rather focused on performance variables such as indicating when a vital sign changed. We aim to investigate the effect of prolonged Head-1 display use on the experience of the supervising anesthesiologists and the experience of their co-workers. In the paper, we contribute 4 themes as the result of a reflexive thematic analysis, an explanation for the observed results using activity theory, and implications for Head-1 display design, implementation, and evaluation. In the study, a supervisor wore the Head-1 display between 8 to 10 days, and we conducted a first observation session during the first 3 days, 1 observation session in the middle, and 1 observation session at the end. Then we conducted an interview with this participant, and the next supervisor wore the Head-1 display. At the end, we had 7 supervisor interviews and 3 times 7, so 21 observation sessions. Towards the end of the study period, we also conducted 8 interviews with co-workers, such as junior anesthesiologists, other supervisors, or anesthetic nurses. We used this data for a reflexive thematic analysis and came up with 4 themes. The first theme was interaction and mindset changes over time. So it took participants some time to familiarize with the hardware, but that only needed a couple of hours. However, actually using the Head-1 display and integrating the Head-1 display into their daily work took a couple of days. The second theme was information on Head-1 displays more than just numbers. For example, in this photo, you can see that there were no vital signs for operating room number 3. And participants use this to organize operating rooms. So this indicates that there's no operation in this operating room. There might be problems in the induction room, or the patient got canceled and did not even show up for this operation. And this needs to be followed up by the supervisor. And this is something that they immediately picked up and immediately used the Head-1 display for. The second, mixed effects on stress, that needed some time, a couple of days to develop. So on the one hand, there's more information. And if, for example, a supervisor got stuck in one operating room, but wanted to keep an eye on another operating room, he could still do that with the head-worn display. So that was kind of reducing stress. On the other hand, there was also an obligation to actually monitor and supervise the other operations, because the information was there and was continuously available. Participants kind of had the feeling they had to make sense out of it. However, it's hard to understand the full patient case with only these 3 vital signs. And then there were alarms going off that attracted attention. And without the head-worn display, there's this natural barrier that they don't know what's going on in that operating room unless the junior anesthesiologist calls and asks a question. So they're also protected from irrelevant alarms. So there were mixed effects on stress. The third theme was head-worn display affects collaboration with supervisors. In general, co-workers perceived an increase in safety when the supervisor was wearing the head-worn display. However, there were the 2 sides of optimized communication with co-workers. Positive side was that there was a common ground to talk about when there was a phone call. So when your junior anesthesiologist called the supervisor, there was no need to tell anything about the vital signs because the supervisor already knew and they could immediately start a discussion. However, if there was a well-led anesthesia by a junior anesthesiologist, the supervisors optimized their work and would not visit that OR that often. So the junior anesthesiologist missed out on informal conversations with the supervisors and also asking important but not urgent questions. The fourth theme was distraction depends on the point of view. First of all, there were no adverse influences on the supervisor's work. We could not observe this, and in no interview anybody said anything about adverse events. However, there was a clear discrepancy in the experience of distraction. So for the co-workers, an alarm on the head-worn display was a distraction because the supervisors, as indicated in the photo, would look at the display during a conversation and there would be a break in the conversation. And sometimes they would also end the conversation and just run or walk away. For the supervising anesthesiologists, any usability issues caused a distraction. So break in Wi-Fi, or if the headband got uncomfortable, or there were hardware issues, such as fiddling around with the buttons on the smart glasses, this was a distraction, but not the actual information or on the head-worn display. So what are some implications for head-worn display design, implementation, and evaluation? One should consider the impact on information on the users. In our case, this is beyond the vital signs. So they were also used for organizational purpose and they affected communication, and the head-worn display information also affected, for example, stress. Hardware matters when users are mobile and active. In our case, participants needed to run or sometimes take off the hardware and put it back on. So this needs to be ensured when this is actually used in the context. The length of the evaluation period seems to affect the insights. Some of our insights were apparent after a couple of hours, but some, such as the effect of stress, needed a couple of days to be visible and observable. And in hindsight, the optimal study length in our case would probably have been around 4 or 5 days. So one needs to consider actually the length of the observation or the evaluation period. And finally, even head-worn display designed for a single user need to consider collaboration. So even if there's only one person using the head-worn display, this is going to affect collaboration and coordination with co-workers. Thank you for your attention.